When I opened my eyes, I didn't recognize the world around me. Everything felt familiar, yet foreign, as though I had slipped between two realities, leaving the one I once knew behind. But as I stood there, taking in the sights and sounds of this new life, a realization washed over me. This wasn't just another life. This was my second chance, a rebirth granted in the wake of my darkest moment. In my past life, I had loved him with everything I had. I gave him my heart, my trust, my future. I believed, with all my soul, that the love we shared would be enough to sustain us through anything. But that belief became my greatest mistake. I had been punished for my love. He had made me feel like I was the one who was wrong, the one who had demanded too much. He had taken my devotion for granted, pushing me to the brink of insanity. And when I couldn't give him more, when my heart bled dry from the weight of it all, he discarded me. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, suffocating silence. He punished me for loving him too much, for being too invested in someone who never truly valued me. That betrayal broke me in ways I can't fully describe. It wasn't just the betrayal of trust, it was the destruction of everything I had ever believed about myself. He had made me feel like I was unworthy, as though my love had been a burden, a curse. And yet, despite everything he did to push me away, I still craved his affection. I still yearned for the love he had once promised me. I wasn't just broken, I was obsessed with the idea of him, with the idea of us. But now, I had been given a second chance. And this time, I wouldn't let myself be broken. This time, I would show him that the girl he had abandoned, the girl he had crushed under the weight of his indifference, was no longer the same. I was no longer desperate for his approval. I was no longer seeking validation from the person who had destroyed me. The pain of my past life still lingered like a scar across my soul, but it was no longer something that defined me. It was a reminder. A reminder of the mistakes I had made, the lessons I had learned, and the woman I had become. I wasn't going to allow myself to become that girl again, the one who gave everything, only to be tossed aside like an afterthought. No, this time, I was going to make him regret losing me. I was going to take control of my own fate, and I was going to rewrite the story he had tried to end. I could already feel the fire burning inside me, the fire of revenge, of empowerment, of justice. The anger that had once consumed me had been transformed into something much more powerful. It wasn't rage, it wasn't hatred, it was purpose. And with that purpose came strength. Strength to move forward, strength to fight for the life I deserved, and strength to ensure that he would never forget the woman he had discarded. This was my rebirth, my chance to reclaim everything I had lost, my chance to show him and the world that I was no longer the broken, desperate girl who had once loved him. I was someone different now, someone stronger, someone who would make him regret everything he had done to me. But first, I had to make him see. I had to make him realize the price of his betrayal. He would understand in time that punishing me for loving him had been the biggest mistake of his life. And when that time came, I would be ready. I had always believed that love was meant to be pure, unconditional, and unbreakable. I had given him everything, the best of my heart, the depth of my trust. I had built my world around him, and for a long time I thought he had done the same. But like all fragile things, our love was just that, fragile, and it shattered in the most cruel, heartbreaking way. It wasn't always like this. In the beginning, it felt like a dream come true. He was my soulmate, or so I thought. When I first met him, it was as if the world had paused, as if all the pieces of my life had finally come together. There was an ease to us, a natural flow that made everything feel effortless. We laughed together, confided in each other, and shared everything, the good and the bad. For a while, I believed that our love was perfect, that we were untouchable. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. The signs were subtle, easy to dismiss. Small moments where he would pull away, or his words would be laced with just enough indifference to make me question my place in his life. Still, I clung to the belief that he loved me. I convinced myself that these were just growing pains, nothing more. I told myself that things would get better, but the truth was that he had already begun pulling away long before I noticed. It wasn't until I found myself emotionally alone in a relationship that I finally saw the truth. He no longer cared the way he once had. The passion had faded, replaced by apathy. His sweet gestures had become rare, his attention fleeting. I was a shadow in his life, clinging desperately to whatever scraps of affection he was willing to give, and I took it. I took whatever he gave me, no matter how little, because I was afraid of losing him. I was afraid of being left behind, of not being enough. It wasn't until the lies began to surface that I finally realized how deeply I had been deceived. The first lie was small, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. A text message he claimed was from an old friend. But something about it didn't sit right with me. The secrecy in his voice when he explained it. The way he tried to avoid my gaze. And when I pressed him, he became defensive. But I let it slide. I told myself I was being paranoid, overthinking things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next lie came soon after. I had been going through a tough time at work, and I needed his support. I had always believed that when life got hard, love would make everything easier. But when I reached out to him for comfort, he wasn't there. Not physically, not emotionally. He brushed me off with excuses, telling me he had something important to do. I felt abandoned, but I pushed it aside, telling myself that he had his own struggles, that he didn't have time for me in that moment. But it wasn't just that. It was everything. The way he would cancel plans at the last minute, the way he became distant whenever I tried to reach out. And when I did get his attention, it was only because he needed something from me. His needs always came first. I was no longer a priority. Still, I held on. I clung to the belief that he loved me, that if I could just be patient, if I could just do enough, he would return to me. But I was lying to myself. The truth was, he was already gone, and I was too blinded by my love to see it. The turning point came one night when I found the evidence I had been dreading. His phone. He had left it unattended, and in that moment, something inside me cracked. I knew I shouldn't snoop, but I couldn't help myself. The messages on his phone were nothing short of devastating. He had been seeing someone else, a woman I didn't know, someone he had been hiding from me for months. The shock hit me like a physical blow. The world around me spun and I couldn't breathe. How could he do this to me? How could the person I trusted most in the world betray me so completely? The texts weren't just casual. They were intimate, filled with affection and promises. I felt like my heart was being torn from my chest. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. His coldness was suffocating. "You should have seen it coming," he said. "You were always so distant, always so caught up in your own world. I needed someone who understood me, who was there when I needed them." I couldn't comprehend it. All the years I had spent loving him, all the sacrifices I had made, and he reduced it all to my distance, as if it had been my fault, as if the emotional neglect I had suffered wasn't enough to drive anyone away. I had given him everything, my love, my trust, my soul, and in return, he had used me as a stepping stone, a temporary companion. The truth was clear now. He had never loved me the way I had loved him. I was nothing more than a placeholder, someone to pass the time until he found someone more interesting, more exciting. And when he got bored of me, when my love became too much for him, he discarded me without a second thought. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the affair. It was the way he had made me feel. He made me believe that I was the one at fault, that I was the reason for his actions. I had become so convinced of my own inadequacy that I forgot who I was. I lost myself in trying to be everything for him, in trying to fix something that was never broken in the first place. As the days passed, I spiraled deeper into a sense of emptiness, of disbelief. The person I had trusted most in the world had hurt me in ways I couldn't even begin to process. But despite all of it, the lies, the betrayal, the broken heart, I never stopped loving him. I never stopped wanting him to realize what he had lost. And that, perhaps, was my greatest weakness. But it wouldn't be for long. The pain of the past would soon become the strength of my future. I had been given a second chance, a chance to rewrite my fate, to reclaim my life, and to make him regret everything he had ever done to me. This time, I wouldn't make the same mistake. This time, I would be strong. This time, I would take control of my destiny. The days after I had confronted him felt like an endless void. The world seemed to move around me, but I was stuck in place, caught between the devastation of the past and the uncertainty of the future. For so long, I had defined myself by my relationship with him. Now I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I had built around someone who never truly cared about me the way I had cared about him. But that was the past, and I couldn't afford to linger in it any longer. The first step to healing wasn't going to come from regret or pity. It was going to come from action, from taking control of the life that had been shattered by his betrayal. I remember the moment it hit me, the realization that I had the power to rebuild, to reclaim the parts of me that I had lost. I wasn't broken. I wasn't weak. I had simply forgotten who I was in the name of love. And now, with the pieces scattered around me, I was going to put myself back together. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for me. I started with the basics, small changes, shifts in my daily routine that would eventually lead to something bigger. The first thing I did was cut all contact with him. It wasn't just about blocking his number or unfollowing him on social media. It was about mentally and emotionally severing the ties that had bound me to him. I needed to stop checking my phone every minute, hoping for some sign that he was thinking about me. I needed to stop pretending that the love I had given him would somehow bring him back. And then came the hardest step, letting go of the hope that he would realize what he had lost, that he would wake up one day and come running back, begging for forgiveness. I had lived with that hope for so long, convincing myself that if I just waited, if I just showed him how much I cared, he would come back to me. But deep down, I knew the truth. He had never cared about me the way I had cared about him. His betrayal was not a mistake. It was a reflection of who he was. And I couldn't afford to waste any more time on someone who would never value me the way I deserved. I began to focus on myself, on my needs, my desires, my passions, the things that I had neglected in the name of love. I signed up for a fitness class, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. I started eating better, sleeping better, and, most importantly, thinking better. I had spent so much time in the shadows of my own mind, doubting my worth and questioning my value. But now I was slowly starting to step into the light, realizing that I was worthy of more than what I had been given. As the days passed, I began to feel stronger, not just physically, but mentally. I started journaling again, writing about everything that had happened, pouring my heart out onto the pages. It wasn't about venting anger or resentment. It was about understanding myself, understanding why I had allowed myself to fall into a cycle of self-doubt and self-sabotage. I had been searching for something outside of myself to complete me, but the truth was, I had everything I needed inside me all along. I also started learning new things, things that would give me a sense of control and purpose. I took up painting, a hobby I had once loved but abandoned years ago. It wasn't about becoming a professional artist or impressing anyone. It was about rediscovering the joy of creation, of expressing myself in a way that didn't require validation from others. I spent hours in my little corner, painting whatever came to mind, feeling the weight of the past slip away with each brush stroke. But as I worked on myself, something inside me began to stir. The anger, the pain, the betrayal. It was all still there, lingering like a storm in the distance. And while I knew I couldn't let that storm define me, I also knew that I wasn't going to let it go unnoticed. The man who had betrayed me, the one who had discarded me like I was nothing, needed to understand the price of his actions. But this time, it wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about making him see that I wasn't just some naive girl who would take him back with open arms. It was about showing him that I had moved on, that I had found my strength, and that I wasn't going to let his betrayal go unpunished. I began to make a plan, though it was nothing like the impulsive decisions I had made in the past. This time, I was going to be strategic. I was going to build my life up, piece by piece, until I became someone that he could never have again. Someone he would regret losing. The first step was to rebuild my career. I had spent so much time putting my personal life above my professional life, allowing my relationship to take precedence over my ambitions. Now, I focused all my energy on advancing my career. I reached out to old colleagues, reconnected with people I had once admired, and took every opportunity to prove my worth. It wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about proving something to myself, something I had forgotten in the wake of our breakup. I was capable of more than I had ever realized. As my confidence grew, so did my resolve. I wasn't just going to get back on my feet. I was going to rise higher than I ever had before. I would make sure that when he saw me again, when he saw the woman I had become, he would regret everything he had ever done to me. I wasn't going to chase him. I wasn't going to beg him for love. I was going to make him come to me. And when he did, he would find that I was no longer the same person he had known. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And this time, I was doing it on my terms. As I began to move forward, to rebuild my life, the world seemed to conspire to remind me of my past. Just as I started to feel like I had regained control, just when I thought I had left the shadows of my former life behind, the storm returned. Ethan. He didn't come back with grand gestures or apologies. He didn't show up at my door, begging for forgiveness. Instead, he did something far more insidious. He started weaving himself into the fabric of my life again, quietly, subtly. It was almost like he was testing me, to see if I would fall back into my old patterns. And for a moment, I could feel the familiar tug of his presence, the weight of his betrayal, pulling me back. It started innocently enough, an accidental run-in at a mutual friend's party. I had been doing so well, feeling strong, when I saw him across the room. He looked the same, handsome, confident, with that same smug smile that had once made my heart race. For a split second, my breath caught in my throat. I had trained myself not to care, not to be affected by him, but seeing him there, standing so casually in front of me, was a shock to my system. He didn't approach me right away. He kept his distance, but I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze like a 1,000-pound anchor. It was like he was silently daring me to make the first move, but I didn't. I stood my ground. I was stronger than I had been before, and I wasn't about to let him see the cracks in my armor. But even though I didn't let him get to me in that moment, I couldn't ignore the quiet stirrings in my mind. His presence had rattled me in ways I didn't expect. I had thought I was done with him, that I was finally free, but there was a part of me, something deep inside, that still wondered if he was watching me, still wondering if he could regain control. It was a moment of weakness I had to face head on, and I hated myself for it. But I knew that facing this discomfort was the only way I could move past it. Then came the text. It wasn't long after the party, just a simple message. I miss the old us. Let's talk. It seemed harmless, right? Just a message. One that could easily be ignored. One that could easily be dismissed. But the words stung, like salt on an open wound. He was trying to worm his way back in, trying to make me believe that he had changed, that he regretted everything. It was the same pattern, the same manipulative game he had played before. He wanted to make me feel guilty for moving on, for becoming strong without him. I knew better than to fall for it, but I also knew that I couldn't let him think I was an easy target. If he wanted to reach out to me, I was going to make him work for it. So, I ignored him. At first. But then came the pressure, the constant reminders of the past that seemed to follow me wherever I went. Ethan wasn't the only one trying to test my resolve. My friends, too, started to ask about him, wondering why I hadn't reached out, why I hadn't tried to fix things. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the assumption that I was still holding on, still waiting for him to return, like a fool. Every time they asked about him, every time they pushed me to forgive him, I felt like I was being dragged back into that painful, toxic cycle. But I didn't give in. Instead, I made a conscious decision to protect my own peace. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't have to justify my choices. I had learned to trust myself, and I was done allowing others to dictate the terms of my healing. It wasn't long before I saw Ethan's real intentions. He wasn't just trying to win me back. He was trying to destroy me in a way that would make me regret leaving him. He had become bolder, more brazen, using every tactic he knew to make me feel small again. One day, I overheard a conversation between him and one of my old friends. They were talking about me, about how I was overreacting, about how I had been too emotional. They said things I couldn't ignore, things that made me realize just how little respect he had for me, even now. He still saw me as someone he could manipulate, someone whose feelings didn't matter. That was the moment I decided I had to take action. I couldn't just keep ignoring him, pretending like I wasn't affected. I had to take control of this situation. I couldn't let him keep playing these games without consequences. I began to work on a strategy, not just to get back at him, but to show him that he could never have the power to break me again. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. This was about empowerment. I was going to make sure that when he looked at me again, when he saw the person I had become, he would regret every moment he had ever spent trying to destroy me. I started by making myself unrecognizable to him. I changed my appearance, my style, my entire way of being. I wanted him to see someone who was completely different from the woman he had walked all over. But more than that, I began to show the world that I didn't need him to be whole. I immersed myself in my work, taking on projects that pushed me further than I had ever gone before. I surrounded myself with people who truly cared about me, people who saw my worth long before Ethan ever did. The more I built up my life, the more I realized that I had been wasting my energy on someone who never deserved it. Ethan wasn't my past anymore. He wasn't my future. And as I made strides toward building my empire, toward becoming the woman I had always wanted to be, I could feel him slipping further and further into my rearview mirror. But he wasn't done. I could sense the tension building. I could see his frustration. And I knew that the final confrontation was inevitable. The moment would come when I would face him again, when he would see the woman I had become. And when he did, he would know that no matter how hard he tried to manipulate, no matter how many games he played, he would never be able to control me again. This time, the tables had turned. I wasn't the one chasing him. I wasn't the one pleading for his love. I was the one in control, and he would regret everything he had ever done to me. The moment I had been waiting for had finally arrived. I had rebuilt my life, brick by brick, each day a testament to my strength, my growth, and my resolve. I wasn't the person I had been before, weak, desperate for affection, hoping that someone else would fill the empty spaces inside me. No, this woman standing here today was someone who had learned to love herself, to stand tall in the face of the adversity she had once feared. It had taken time, patience, and a hell of a lot of grit to get here, but I had done it. I had survived the storm, and now I was ready to face the very thing that had once destroyed me, Ethan. But this time, I wasn't going to cower or beg for answers. This time, I was going to make him see the consequences of his actions. I had spent months planning, building the life I wanted, and preparing for this moment. But nothing could have truly prepared me for the way things would unfold. I had expected him to fight back, to try and win me over again. But I had underestimated his desperation. He wasn't just trying to get back into my life. He was trying to destroy the very foundation I had worked so hard to build. It started with the small things, the subtle attempts to undermine my progress, to make me question everything I had accomplished. Ethan started spreading rumors about me at work, painting me as unstable, accusing me of being emotionally unpredictable. At first, I felt the old familiar sting, the desire to react, to prove him wrong. But then I stopped. I realized something that I had never understood before. His words didn't matter. What mattered was the life I was creating, the woman I had become. So, I did what I had learned to do best. I focused on myself. I ignored the rumors, the whispers behind my back, and I kept moving forward. I kept building my empire, making connections, and focusing on my growth. Every step I took was a reminder of how far I had come, how much stronger I had become in his absence. And as I built my own success, I realized that his attempts to tear me down were only making me more resilient. The breakthrough came when I discovered that Ethan had been spreading false accusations not just about my career, but about my character. He had been telling people that I was mentally unstable, that I had changed into someone unrecognizable. He had been telling people that I was mentally unstable, that I had changed into someone unrecognizable. He wanted to paint me as someone to be feared, someone whose accomplishments were nothing more than a facade. But what he didn't know was that the more he tried to tear me down, the more he made me stand taller. It wasn't enough to let the world see the truth, though. I had to take action. I couldn't let him get away with the way he had manipulated me, with the way he had tried to erase everything I had worked for. I decided to confront him, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but out of the need for justice. I called him, my voice steady, my mind clear. It was time to put an end to this once and for all. "Ethan," I said, "we need to talk." He didn't even bother with pleasantries. "What now?" His voice was filled with the same condescension I had grown so used to, as though I was beneath him. "I know what you've been saying about me," I said. "I know you've been trying to destroy everything I've worked for. You've been spreading lies about my character, about my work, and I'm not going to stand for it anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he would hang up, but he didn't. He remained on the line, the tension thick between us. "I'm just speaking the truth," he finally said. "You've changed. You're not the person I fell in love with. You're not the person I knew." "I'm not that person anymore," I said, my voice unwavering. "And you don't get to define who I am. You don't get to erase everything I've built." I've moved on, Ethan. I've rebuilt myself, and I'm not going back to that broken version of me. I won't let you destroy me again. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his voice laced with disbelief. You think you're better than me now? You think you can just walk away and forget everything we had? I don't need you to define me anymore, I said, my tone calm but firm. What we had was never real. It was a lie, and you're not going to get away with it. That was when the power shifted. The words I had always wanted to say to him, those words that I had kept inside, locked away out of fear, finally came rushing out. He had controlled me for so long, had made me feel like I was nothing, like I was just an accessory to his life. But now, the tables had turned. He was no longer the center of my universe. I was. I'm not the one who needs to regret anything here, I said. You are. Because when you look back on everything you've done, you'll realize that you lost the best thing that ever happened to you, and you will never get me back. And just like that, I hung up. I had said everything I needed to say. I had taken control. Ethan's attempts to destroy me had failed. He had underestimated my strength, my resilience, and my ability to move forward. The woman he had tried to manipulate, the one he thought he could control, was no longer in his life. And as I moved forward, I realized something I had never fully understood before. I had always been enough. I had always had the strength within me to stand on my own. Ethan had never been my savior. He had been a lesson, a painful one, but one that had led me to the woman I had become. The future was mine to shape. I had reclaimed my power, my dignity, and my self-worth. And in that moment, I knew that I had won. Not because of anything I had done to him, but because of everything I had done for myself. The woman I had once been, the one who had been broken by love, by betrayal, was gone. In her place stood someone who was stronger, more confident, and completely in control of her own destiny. And Ethan? He would have to live with the consequences of his actions, knowing that the person he had once tried to destroy was now thriving and would never look back. The days following my confrontation with Ethan were like a fresh breeze after a storm. The weight that had once pressed down on my chest had lifted, replaced with a lightness that I had longed for, but never thought I could have again. I was free, not just from Ethan, but from the version of myself that had allowed him to hold power over me for so long. I had spent years of my life bound by the belief that I needed someone else to define my worth. I had given so much of myself to him, thinking that his love would make me whole. But in the end, I realized that I had always been whole. I had been complete, even when I didn't see it. The woman who had once been torn apart by betrayal, who had been left in the ruins of a relationship that never truly served her, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had learned to love herself, who had learned to trust her own instincts, who had learned that no one else's validation could make her feel complete. And that woman, strong, confident, and resilient, was unstoppable. My career, once something I had put on the back burner in the name of love, was thriving. I had gained the respect of my peers, the trust of those around me, and the satisfaction of knowing that every accomplishment was earned through my own hard work, not through anyone's approval. I was no longer just existing. I was living a life that was truly mine, built on my own terms. But it wasn't just work that had changed. My personal life, too, was evolving. I had started to reconnect with old friends, people who had once been my support system before I had lost myself in the toxic world of my past relationship. They had always believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. And in reconnecting with them, I discovered a new sense of belonging, one that wasn't dependent on any one person, but on the deep, genuine connections I had built with others. And then there was love. For so long, I had been afraid of love, afraid of falling into the same patterns, afraid of being hurt again. But I had come to understand something important. Love wasn't about finding someone to fix me, someone to fill the emptiness inside. It was about two people coming together, sharing their lives, their flaws, and their strengths. It wasn't about dependency, it was about partnership. I met someone who saw me, really saw me, not as the broken person I had been, but as the woman I had become. He didn't try to rescue me, he didn't try to heal my wounds. He simply loved me for who I was. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't need to be. What mattered was that it was real. For the first time, I felt whole without needing anyone to complete me. In many ways, my relationship with Ethan had taught me the most profound lesson of all. It had shown me my own strength, my ability to rise from the ashes, to rebuild myself when I thought I could never be whole again. Ethan had hurt me, betrayed me, and tried to destroy everything I had worked for. But in the end, he had been the catalyst for my transformation. Without him, I would never have found the strength I didn't know I had. And now, as I looked back on everything, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known before. I had come full circle. I had taken my broken heart, my shattered dreams, and I had built something beautiful, something that was mine, something that no one could take away. The road hadn't been easy. There had been moments when I had doubted myself, when I had wondered if I would ever escape the pain of my past. But each step forward had been a step toward healing, toward reclaiming my life, toward becoming the person I was always meant to be. And Ethan? Well, he had faded into the background, a distant memory of a time when I had let someone else define me. He had tried to break me, to control me, to make me feel like I wasn't enough. But in the end, it was he who had lost. Because the woman he had discarded was no longer the same. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than he could ever imagine. I had learned to forgive him, not for his sake, but for mine. I had let go of the anger, the resentment, the need for vengeance. Because I realized that the true power came not from holding on to the past, but from embracing the present and the future. I had learned that I didn't need him to feel complete. I was already complete. As I stood there, looking out at the life I had built, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Grateful for the lessons I had learned, for the strength I had found, and for the woman I had become. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. I was no longer afraid. I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that I had the power to face it with strength, grace, and the confidence that I was enough. This was my life, my journey, and I would continue to walk it with my head held high, knowing that no one could ever take away the woman I had become.